So my name's Professor Anne Stevenson, and I'm Director of Community Education at the GK School of Medical Education. And welcome to our KUMEC Tutors Conference 2021. And we're really happy to see you here this morning to talk and think around all things medical education. So the past year has been tremendously challenging. No need to say more, except to say that our GP tutors, you have done a truly heroic job to keep our students in clinical placements and engaged in learning. And I really don't have the words to express our students' appreciation, except to say thank you. And our students have really valued their relationships with you online and in person. And in this time of isolation, actually, your work has been so important for the mental health of our students. And they've loved feeling part of a team through the pandemic. They've loved helping with things such as COVID vaccinations, and their understanding of what it means to be a doctor, the responsibilities and the opportunities has been really cemented by the COVID experience in a way that's not been evident in previous years. I mean, we know in previous years, students didn't always turn up to placements. They weren't always engaged. This year, they've been really engaged. And it's been amazing to see. And that's been one of the upsides of this horrible time. Let me just read out a typical student comment. Dr. X is a brilliant GP tutor, an excellent teacher, kind, flexible, supportive. They have made a lasting impression on me, and I'm very glad that I have had the pleasure of working with them. They have given us many teaching opportunities, trusted us, which is a huge thing, and their advocacy for patient safety is exemplary. We always felt welcome at the practice, and many of us work with some of the practice staff at one of the COVID vaccination centres, allowing us to feel part of the team. And so this is a typical piece of feedback. So I'm not going to say more, except I hope you enjoy the morning, and our thanks to Roz and Rini and Naomi for organising the conference, for the team in supporting them in this, to those presenting and running workshops, and to all of you for attending. And I'll be saying a little bit more at the end about what we see going forward. So thank you again, and I'll pass you on to Roz for the next bit. Roz.
Thank you, Anne. So when we were thinking about the theme for this conference, we stole really this title of Building Back Better, which I think everybody under the sun has used actually, including Joe Biden. But we wanted to think about what can we do to build back better for ourselves and for our students. Not that it hasn't been incredibly good during the pandemic, but as we open up, what do we want to keep? So our speakers today are along that theme and what we've learned during the pandemic. I'm really pleased that Dr. Radha Mogdili is here. We've got Dr. Sarah Bennett, we've got Lois, we've got lots of other people from UCL, and we're going to be thinking about how we can bring the good of blended learning, how we can look deeper into the students' learning and promote that. But also, Radha is going to kick off with how we can infuse our students with more compassion for themselves, for more compassion for ourselves, and build back with more optimism in the medical profession. So I'm going to hand over to Radha in a second. Radha I met when I used to work at Imperial, and she always brought such enthusiasm and joy to the students when she taught them and to her colleagues. What I really loved about her was the fact that she promoted well-being everywhere, but also gave a huge sense of autonomy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Roz. It's a real pleasure to be here and a real pleasure, real honour to be invited. So thank you ever so much. for asking me to do this. It really is a real pleasure. Lovely to see you as well, see faces after a year of not being face to face. So yes, I'm just gonna go into my screen to share my screen. Okay, so yeah, my presentation really is around the same themes that Ros was speaking about. Obviously, we've had such a challenging year, and that is the understatement. I'm sure all of you, every single one of you, has actually really felt the strains, the stresses, the challenges of the pandemic. And just hearing from Anne some of the testaments from the medical students of people that you've been teaching and supporting and tutoring, it really is an absolute admirable testament to your work as tutors and teachers. And I think one of the key things that I would like to really reiterate to all of you is to say thank you, and well done. Because we don't often hear thank yous and well dones, and we don't hear them enough. But I think it's just a really great time for you all to sit back and just reflect about what you've actually achieved in the last year and a half, what you've been through, what you've coped with, and just how much of an impact you've had on all the students that you've taught in terms of supporting them, because you've also been the backbone for them. So I'd like to say well done and thank you to all of you for getting through the last year and a bit. So my presentation today, I hope, will be inspiring. I hope it's going to be a chance for you to reflect and to think about, as Ros was saying, just how you want to move forward and how we can build back better, because after a period of change and challenge, there is also an opportunity to reset, rethink, and to reflect and to learn lessons to help us move forward and help us to move forward in a more positive, optimistic, and more effective way. So my talk is going to be just for about 15 minutes. It's going to be very much a how-to. I'm a big believer in practical steps and practical tips, and advice is great, but I think also the how-to is really important, because that's what makes it tangible and makes people, all of us, be able to actually put it into practice, which is obviously how things change, and not necessarily just by words. So a bit about me. Thank you so much, Ros, for your kind introduction. So I'm a GP. I normally work in London. I've been working outside of London for the last year and a half in the pandemic in A&E. I've also been teaching medical students since about 2009, which I absolutely love. They give me energy, they give me optimism, and they give me a lot of self-reflection as well. And back in sort of 2008, I sort of fell into doing broadcasting work and television and radio, really by chance. My sister saw an advert in a hospital near where she lived, and she brought it back for me, and that was for a BBC Three programme. So I tried that and I absolutely loved it. I really liked, like all of you do, really like communicating, really like sharing knowledge and information, and really liked seeing positive change and learning from other people in a very creative way. And I think that's something which all of you can relate to and all of you do every single day. So since that time, I've got involved in anything and everything that makes me feel inspired, helps me feel like I'm making a difference. And I've been really lucky to do a lot of stuff really around mental health, emotional well-being, because I personally feel that if we can build on that and get those foundations right about how we think, about recognizing feelings and self-awareness, then actually all of those changes, habit changes, positive changes that we can make in our lives all stem from that. So that's where my passion really has been in terms of my broadcasting work. So I now want to try and perhaps share some of the things that I've learned with you during this talk in terms of how we can build back. Hopefully it'll be relevant, practical, and hopefully it will make you reflect on just how incredible you already are, but also what things you can maybe do in your own life and in the lives of the students that you teach to actually help get better as well. So as I've said, a big well done. Challenge is not easy. I mean, we've also had crisis as well at points in our professional lives and perhaps in personal life as well. And I think it's really important to think right now about that term resilience, which is used a lot, but it really is an important thing to think about. How are you feeling right now as an individual? Are you feeling burnt out? Are you feeling tired, exhausted, you know, that can have an impact on how we communicate, our ability to connect, and our ability to be the kind of teachers and tutors and role models for our students. And likewise, anything that we reflect on in ourselves is also obviously relevant for our students and our patients around us. And it really does come back to that old saying of, you know, we need to look after ourselves first in order to be able to give the kind of things that we want to other people. And also by our actions, I think, inspire other people around us much more. So if we're actually taking the time to look after ourselves, then hopefully we can inspire others too as well, just by our simple actions every single day. So reconstruct now after we've all been deconstructed is the key message. So I put together a little kind of ingredient pack, if you like, a little recipe about how we can all individually build back better. And with that individual change, hopefully then within our groups that we work within, they can also change, and then that will also ripple out into our students and our patients also. So a bit of a toolkit that I've created. There are lots of things you can put in this toolkit, but I think it's I've chosen basically about 5 things that I think are not often spoken about in terms of well-being and sort of building back and making positive change. But I think they're really important things. I think these 5 components that I've listed here on this slide are often seen as sort of fluffy things or ethereal things that don't really matter, or perhaps we talk about them when we're at primary school. But I'm a really strong believer that these are all things that we need as adults, and actually really powerful tools to help us build back better, to look after ourselves, and to hopefully help ourselves make positive change as well in our lives. So kindness, creativity, individuality, time and joy. And I'd really like to focus in turn on each of those 5 for others and for yourself as well. So first of all, kindness. What is kindness? You might be thinking this is really simple and really obvious, but I don't think many of us really give ourselves time to think about the power of kindness and what it actually looks like. And kindness is really important because it's about giving ourselves the space and the time to actually recognize ourselves. So it's giving time, it's being given time, it's for others, it's for ourselves, it's about connection, and it's in our communication, obviously with our words, our eye contact, our body language, all the things that you know really well as amazing tutors, and things you do every single day with patients as well. So I always think it's helpful to think about what kindness is not. So kindness is not a soft skill. It's not something that we that doesn't exist. It's not something that isn't tangible. It's not a nice add-on, and it's not nice if you can get it. It's an absolute essential. If you think about in your daily lives the times that you've shown a student that basic kindness, or a patient that basic kindness, and the response and the impacts that you've had on that individual, I would go so far as to say that actually is probably the thing that they will remember for the rest of their lives, and the thing that you will remember, and also the thing that actually gives you the most satisfaction from your job. So just think about some examples of when you've been kind to someone, but also when someone has been kind to you, and really think about what that's done for your emotional well-being, your mental health, and also that connection and bonding together. It's not fluffy or woolly, and it's not a tick box. So just have a little think about what kindness means to you, and actually, like I say, how it can help, how practicing kindness in our daily lives can help us build back better for ourselves, and then sequentially for other people around us. How important is it? Well, it is life-saving. I believe that. I think kindness, time, empathy, communication, someone feeling heard and listened to can save lives. It can help our students to feel recognised, particularly in this time of crisis and challenge. And it's a simple tool. It's one that we've all got. And it's basically, I think about it as the equivalent of sort of basic life support, if you like, for our mental health. And it's also not just for us and our patients and students, but for organisations. It's at every single level, but we need to start with ourselves first. So why should we, and how can we bring more kindness to ourselves? Well, why should we? Well, The energy we bring to our work and our educational roles really matters, as you all know. When we're kind to ourselves, we have that energy to give our students, we have that energy to give our colleagues, especially during this time of stress and pressure professionally. I think that's really important, to bring teams together. And also the purpose that we bring, the support we can offer others, and the intention that we carry. And kindness really tangibly can be thought of as our thoughts about ourselves, our feelings about ourselves, and our actions towards ourselves, and they feed into our self-esteem and confidence. And again, this might seem really basic to you, but these things have real impacts on how we feel and how we can then come out of this crisis and challenge and move forward into change, and change for the better. So again, just thinking about your thoughts, like what thoughts do you have about yourself? Those can be changed. You know, they're a habit. They're a habit of thoughts, habit of actions. It takes time, but it can be done. So recognizing its importance, recognizing why you want to kind of treat yourself a bit more kindly. We've all known that when we're under stress and pressure and challenge, we tend to perhaps neglect ourselves, forget about ourselves, put ourselves last. And I would love to say to all of you today that actually, just to start thinking about how you can do the opposite. Are you giving yourself time and space in your day? Are you looking after yourself? Are you creating moments of self-kindness, like having an early night, like having a bath, for example? And how are you talking and thinking about yourself? Are you saying well done to yourself enough after those challenging sessions with students or sessions with patients, for example? So yes, these are just some questions to think about for you in terms of tangible changes that you can make. So what is kindness to you? How can you practice that to yourself on a daily basis? How can you show that to other people? And also the kind of daily tools that you can use to build self-esteem and confidence. We've all had our working patterns changed over the last year and a half. We've had to work in different environments, different methods and modes of working, and every single change that we have can knock our confidence, can knock our self-esteem. So how are you reaching out for support about that? How are you talking to yourself about actually saying well done and congratulating yourself and building your confidence again, and not to be worried or ashamed about perhaps knocks to your confidence? We've all had to go through a lot of variations of how we work, and I think that's really important to recognise. So not to be too hard on yourself, and to share that with other people, share that with colleagues. Second kind of tangible tool is creativity, which I'm a big fan of, and I think it's got a really massive role in building back better. Creativity obviously helps us to be aware of that our present moment and the now, helps us to connect into joy, and it also gives us so many ways of communicating and connecting with other people. You know, when we're involved in creative pursuits together, we really bond, we really connect, and we connect in a different way. I'm sure you can all relate to doing an activity like painting or pottery, or just playing with children in your lives or young people in your lives. There's a way that we connect that is so different when we're doing an activity like that and something creative compared to just talking to somebody. And also it can help us set goals. It's holistic. So again, as professionals, sometimes we tend to always focus on our work, but thinking about creativity and us as a whole person. And going back to that time when we were at school, perhaps, when, you know, we used to have to put forward our sort of forms for applying for university, and they would always say make sure it's a well-rounded application and you show your talents in lots of different aspects of your life, not just about academic work. And I think we need to remember that for our adult lives as well. So what does creativity look like? Well, it looks like whatever you want it to look like. There's no should, no right or wrong. It could be gardening, arts, crafts, baking, anything, but also things like coding, IT design. There's lots of things that are creative that don't look like that sort of stock image on a newspaper article that we might see with a typical image of someone painting. It could be anything that really takes you away from worries, from the future, from the past sort of thinking, anything that brings you into that present moment, and anything that brings you joy and helps you express who you are, because also that's another way that we can build back better and kind of improve our resilience. So as I said, not comparison based, not judgment based, It really is about building that resilience and capacity to manage challenge and change, and also to bring balance and grounding, I think, and self-care to you, and also to encourage your students to get creative in the way they present, the way they express themselves, the way they work with you. I think that's also a really great thing to help students get back into and really encourage in them also. So yes, again, just reflect, what is this like for you? So we're all individuals. What are you doing already? What are you not doing? What did you used to enjoy? What's been squeezed out of life because you got busy? Why did you stop doing that? And what did it provide you with? How did it make you feel? And then what are the obstacles and challenges to you restarting that? And what practical steps can you take to actually get that creative space back in your life? Because that's going to help, like I say, us to move forward as individuals, as teams, and as tutors as well. The third thing is individuality. So we're all unique. We all react to things differently at different speeds and different ways, and in different times. And I think the way that we're coming hopefully out of the pandemic now, we need to recognise that we're all individuals, and we need to empathise and understand with our students, our patients, but also ourselves. How are we doing coming out of this? How are we feeling? Not just to take a stock approach to students, to ourselves, that we should all be adapting and sort of recovering in a certain way. So really listen, really hear, really try to understand, for you, and also, like I said, for your students. What do they need? What's happened to them in their lives? What are their specific worries and fears? And I think if we can help and understand that individuality, we can then tailor how we're approaching, how we're teaching, and how we're basically managing situations as we move forward. So to keep that in the back of our minds always. There is a huge pressure to conform and the comparison trap. So again, you know, if students are feeling excluded, if they've got a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect, or they're feeling undervalued, then really important to recognise that. And again, building back better is based on non-judgment. It's about seeing through that story and commenting only on our journey or their journey, and being positive about that, trying to break free, if you like, from that pressure to conform and that pressure to compare, which is very evident in my work with students and young people. Fourth thing is time. Might sound simple, might sound really obvious, but again, sometimes there's this pressure and a rush to be better and to get back to normal, whatever that might be, before we're ready, and without recognizing what has changed and how we've been changed as people. We've all been changed by what we've experienced over the last year and a half, and I think it's important to recognize that. And if we take the time to recognize that and to process that, then our building back better is more likely to be long lasting, more likely to be maintained, more likely to be authentic, and more likely to be open to new ideas, new ways, and new strategies. Once we've processed feelings and challenges from the past, we're then able to then reset, think about the present, and then move forward into the future, and to build back better with meaning, rather than just because we think we should, or we're in a rush to get back to how things were, when actually maybe that's no longer relevant or useful. So it takes time to create your new vision, whether it's in your individual life, in your tutoring role, or in your organisational role. What does that building back better look like? Really visualise that. What would you feel like? How would it look? What was working and what wasn't? And why do you want to change it? And how are you going to change it? It's a gradual process, and it's that kind of whole process of reviewing and appraising as you go along to see how things are going. But I think really sitting down and reflecting about what you would like to be different, and really visualising that, can be really helpful in maintaining change. And the last thing is joy. And I'm a big fan of this. I know, again, it might sound really obvious and really simple, but we forget about joy, particularly in times of challenge and after a lot of change. We can just rush ahead and we forget that actually we need to refill. You know, we focus on getting through things and the hard stuff, but we need to focus on the good stuff and about refilling our sort of emptying pot, if you like, of joy and of resilience. So again, it reinvigorates us. It's a daily tool we can create and use to help us feel better. And it's a tool that we can help ourselves to communicate and connect with our students and with our patients as well. So it is a balance of the hard work, building back, but also the joy. And it really helps, again, us to bond together after a long time of being away and apart from each other. It's something which can really connect us together as well. So what does joy look like to you? Again, it's a bit like creativity. Everyone is different. It might be a bath, an ice cream, a comedy. It might be a student that's made progress, that you've helped, that you've impacted in some way, a patient who says thank you. It really can be very simple. And I think it's really helpful for you to all sit back and think, what actually brings me joy in my day-to-day life? And how can I get more of that? And how can you create that and make space for that? So we've all been through a lot, we've all been changed, and we need to give ourselves all of those different tools really to help ourselves build back, but also build back better. And I think we can all do that. And I would really like to say to all of you that I think the work you've done has been incredible. I think the way you support students has been incredible. And yeah, just keep on doing what you're doing, but also don't forget about yourselves in the process. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for listening. And let's all try and support each other with those really simple daily tools to help us all build back better.
Thank you so much, Radha. Lots to think about. Immediately when you were saying the joy, I was thinking I have one very elderly patient, she's 85, and she brings me a spice bun every week. And she has done throughout the whole pandemic. And I think what enormous joy that's brought me. You know, it's been phenomenal. So these little moments are just transformative, aren't they, when we tap into them? So thank you so much, Radha. I'd like to hand over to Dr. Sarah Bennett. Now, Sarah is the Deputy Programme Lead and Admissions Tutor at UCL. It sounds like you're a busy woman. Thank you so much for sparing the time to be with us today. Now, my understanding is that you've been doing a lot of research into approaches to create deeper learning. And as we build back and we think, what parts of blended learning do we want to keep? We'd really love to hear from you how we can do that and what some of the answers are. What's been good about blended learning or online learning? So can I hand directly over to you, Sarah?
You absolutely can. Thank you very much, Roz, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's such a pleasure to speak to a group of like-minded people who are interested in this sort of area, and I've developed a significant interest of learning approaches over the last 10 years that I've worked at UCL Medical School. So as Roz said, I'm the deputy lead for the programme and I'm also the admissions tutor, so it has been a busy year in trying to plan and deal with constant change, which I think has been what has been so difficult for both us and our students. And our students really don't like change. And it's very difficult to bring the students with you when you're constantly on the hoof and you're trying to think about what might happen in the future. So about the learning approaches of our medical students at our university, which will then spread further. And I think the pandemic has really crystallised to me about how the learning environment really makes a huge difference to an approach that students will take. And over the pandemic era, we've been bombarded by students telling us that they've missed opportunities, that there's been variable clinical experience across all of their placements, that there's perhaps been unfairness or inequity. And it's always made me reflect on why do students feel like that? And it is often due to the outcome, isn't it? It's due to the assessment at the end. It is due to the fact that they feel disadvantaged moving forwards. And so how can we make that learning environment more inviting, more conducive to deeper learning in a setting that is going to be a bit different post-COVID? So that is the plan for my next 15 minutes. So I shall share my screen and hopefully that will work. So I've put here that this is the approach to success in a sense, and I hope that that's what it is, because as admissions tutor, my raison d'etre is to bring students into the medical school who are going to thrive on the programme and they're going to be successful at the end, that they're going to be doctors and contribute to society in that wonderful way. And so I hope that we can encourage that. And I think GPs hold all the keys in this respect. We get fantastic feedback from our students as well at UCL about their GP placements and how wonderfully they feel they fit into the environment and how they are made part of the team. They feel legitimate. They are participants in that learning environment, and it makes such a difference. And I think our colleagues elsewhere can learn a lot from that setting. And so you're doing an awful lot of the right things. But there are some other aspects that we can perhaps think about to make it just that little bit better. So I hope that at the end of this very short session, you'll think about your own approach to learning, because we've thought just before about our own role modeling in this and how can we role model those approaches. Some of the influences on learning, and in particular, I've mentioned the learning environment, but there are other things as well, and things that we can influence, and discuss how we can encourage those deeper approaches. Okay, so let's get a picture up there first. So I'm all about a bit of variety in teaching. We know that online teaching is a little bit tricky. We know that people don't like to put their cameras on and interact, and particularly when it's being recorded. And that is a question that I'm sure people will ask and is a very difficult one to answer. But I'd like you to have a look at this picture. So have a look at it, take it in. I'll give you 10 seconds. Okay, it's gone. So when you were looking at that picture, what were you thinking? I'm sure, like me, you're perhaps thinking, is there going to be a test? Is she going to ask me a particular question about this? What am I supposed to be doing? What am I getting out of this? What is the point? And in many learning situations, we're all thinking that. We're all having those thoughts about what is the point? What am I supposed to get out of this? What is the relevance? What is the outcome? And for our students, there is no doubt that there is a test at the end of this, is high on their priority list. So if I was to ask you now, how many coloured balls were there in that picture? Could you tell me? Anybody in the chat?
17.
17, thank you, Raj.
14.
I would say that again, shout it out.
14.
14. Oh, Lois, you knew 14. You knew what my question was going to be. And that's the thing, is that the students anticipate that too. They anticipate, what are we going to get them to do? Are we going to get them to do something that they don't know, something that's going to embarrass them, or is there going to be a test at the end of it? And that does affect the way that they learn. So consider that. When they're in your learning environment, consider whether they are thinking about what is the outcome to this, and can you guide them in that? So putting them in the environment where they're observing something, give them the task to do. So there were in fact 14 coloured balls there, but some of you may well have learnt that or thought about that in a different way. You might have thought, well, you know, I know that that's a picture of Kew Gardens and I've seen that before, so actually I remember that, and I remember that there are 14 balls there. So there is another approach to this, that repetition, that seeing things multiple times or recognising a pattern can also help with that learning. So hopefully you'll take that away and you'll have a think about that, and think about when the student is sitting in your clinic, what are they thinking and how can you guide that? So that's my first top tip as such. So thank you for that. So moving on. So I think that variety and involvement is a huge part of learning and is a huge part of the way that we can really interact with our students as teachers. And so online, I've grown to love a bit of Mentimeter. So you might not have access to this, but you might have access to things like Slido, or to use phones, or to use the chat, use the whiteboard, to get students involved as well. So I'm going to ask you this question. What does learning mean to you? So if you can go on your phones or on your computer to menti.com, enter the code there, and then answer the questions that are on the screen ahead of you. And then hopefully that will give you the chance to think about, what does learning actually mean to you? So I'll get the screen up in a second when you've had a chance to look at that. I'm going to just stop sharing that. So I hope everybody has thought about that in a bit more detail. Let's share this. Whoa, look at that. Okay. So that's really interesting, isn't it? So quite a lot of you are focusing on the development as a person. Fantastic. A lot of you are being able to use that information that you've acquired. Brilliant. And that's exactly what medicine's all about, isn't it? Is that we want to be able to put what we learn into practice. And lots of you are putting about the meaningfulness of that knowledge. It's great to see that fewer of you are thinking about the remembering things well, because I think a lot of students think of learning as memorizing, of remembering facts. And again, a lot of our assessments are very much like that, aren't they? They push students to think like that. And building up knowledge and acquiring facts. Really interesting. So have a think about what your approach is and how can you role model that to students? Because we all go to conferences for a really good reason, don't we? We go to conferences to learn, but to develop ourselves. And I think as we get older and as we go through our training, we learn in a different way. So that's interesting. So let's go back to the slides again. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. So there are different approaches to learning. So through my research, this is sort of my main theoretical perspective that I'm looking at. And you'll see there that that's from quite a long time ago. So in the 1970s, this research was happening and thinking about how do students learn. And Martin Salho came up with this idea of just getting students to read a passage from a book and then to think about a few weeks later, a test. So they didn't tell them there was going to be a test, but then there were different ways in which students approached that reading. Some approached it in a really in-depth way. They were thinking about the linkages in the paragraph, in the text, thinking about things that they'd learned before, had they read that paragraph before, and they were quite interested in it. So it was an interesting task. There were others that were very strategic about it. So they thought about how long did they have to look at it? What was going to be the assessment at the end of it? Why do I need to know this? And how am I going to be assessed on it? And then there were others that just felt that I'm not quite sure why I'm doing this, so I'm just going to memorize that text. Again, really interesting when I think about my own approaches and how perhaps I've covered several of those different approaches during my time. And sometimes I do revert to that surface approach if I just need to know these facts and I'm not quite sure why I need to know this because maybe I can look it up. And I think these days, a modern medical curriculum is very much about teaching students about where can you go to find these facts, because we don't, none of us keep the facts in our heads. We hope that we have the deeper understanding and the knowledge behind it, but there are some things that we need that surface approach for. But you'll see there that motivation comes up a lot. Interest in the subject, sense of achievement, but also fear of failure. And I do think that our students do fear failure quite significantly. They fear the exam and how it might impact their future career. And that's what we're facing at the moment in our curriculum. But I do really feel that the deeper approach is super important and we need to be promoting this. It's lifelong learning, it's self-regulated, self-reflective, and that's what's so important in healthcare, is that we're able to take that step back and think about what went well in this situation, what might I do differently? Those who adopt surface approaches have been found to perform less well, in fact, because they are memorizing, and unless you have a photographic memory, that's quite hard. And workload and stress often mean that students revert to those surface approaches. And so by filling their time, by giving them little time for reflection and consolidation, we're pushing them towards that approach. And learning approaches can contribute to their academic success. And that's what we said at the beginning we want. We want them to be successful on the programme. So let's go back to Menti. Let's get involved again. What do you think? Going back to that slide, we talked about motivation. What do you think motivates our students to learn? So you can type something into there. I shall get up the screen again. Apologies for sharing and unsharing. Sometimes Menti does affect my my screen and makes me freeze, so I've tried to keep it separate today. What motivates our students to learn? Fun environment, I like that. Exams, 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 yes. Interest, the teacher, fantastic. And there definitely that comes across in feedback, doesn't it? Inspiring, role modeling teachers. A feeling of accomplishment that they have actually achieved something. And I think we can do more to find that sense of achievement in students. You know, at the end of the day, that debrief of what have you learned today? What have you got out of the session today? What have you got out of sitting in clinic today? A bit of curiosity, future career, I hope that motivates them still. A balance, situation mentors to be good doctors, fantastic. Enjoying the topic as well. And that is a lot about the teacher too. That's really helpful. And you have already thought about this, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for that. Okay, moving back to my slides. So, can we influence students' approach to learning? So I think we can as teachers. That there are several things that we can do, because what influences learning is not only the individual, but the outcomes of learning. What does it mean to them? What is their motivation for that? So the interest, the role modeling, the assessment, and society and the learning environment itself. So what are the pressures that are on the students to take part in learning? And so during my research, I came up with this, that the interest and motivation of the learner are super important, but there are all these other factors that we need to take into consideration. The competitiveness, social media factors, the ability to actually self-regulate their own learning and think about what do they need to do to improve. The learning environment itself, about the curriculum, the assessment, the teaching, and the outcomes, qualifications, prizes, job prospects, patience. And I really hope that we can again role model that patience is so important as an outcome. And we've already commented how much joy patience can bring us. And I hope that as GPs we can role model that and show that patients are at the centre of our care. So how can we help? So I think, and I've mentioned it a lot about role modelling and about how we can show that learning approaches and deeper approaches to learning and understanding are really important. And we can talk to students about that. We can provide guidance and support through their working day. We can do that debrief at the end of the day to ask them what they've learned. And I think an apprenticeship is so important. We've moved away from that quite a lot, and we're trying to claw it back. An apprenticeship is observing, learning from others, learning from your work environment. We can guide their observation. There are often times when students are sitting in the corner, aren't there? Or times where they're sitting with other healthcare professionals. How can we guide their learning in that environment? And we've talked obviously about blended approaches as well. Now, an apprenticeship is learning through and from work. So what can we do? And I've mentioned some of those already, but I want to focus on the one right on the right-hand side there, the empowerment and agency. I feel strongly that students need to feel empowered. They need to have the agency for change. They need to know that their opinions are valid. They need to know that you are listening to them and that you're changing or shaping their placement to help with their learning. So asking them right at the beginning, what do they want to get out of this, is a very simple way to give them that empowerment, give them that agency. And we've talked a little bit about a blended approach. So that is the way that we're moving forwards at UCL next year, that a blended by design approach is being achieved. So there will be a lot of face-to-face interaction, and we are moving back towards that. It's what we all want, it's what we appreciate, it's that social learning aspect that we like. But the blended approach, by having some time to consolidate and reflect, are so important. As Radha just said, the time to think about that kindness and joy helps to provide that space. Making the most of clinical opportunity when it's there, so that they are getting something out of that time, so that then when they're elsewhere or they're doing something remotely or online, it becomes important. And online learning can provide that additional context and provide you with extra case studies and the chance to talk through learning that they have done. And joining sessions remotely helps them to join from elsewhere. There is no doubt traveling miles makes a difference, doesn't it? And going out to remote places can affect their learning. We know that that's at the very base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of thinking about students and their environment is so important. So it's a quick race through, but I hope that I've given you a little bit of a thought process through my presentation of thinking about your own learning and your own approach, and as an approach as professionals in this environment, as lifelong learners, continuous professional development, and how can we foster that in our students as well. I think we need to consider what influences learning, and to make sure that we are considering that when we are talking to our students and setting out tasks. And I hope that deeper approaches to learning can be fostered in the learning environment by thinking about the debrief, thinking about the apprenticeship, the observation, and providing some space for students to have agency and opportunity. So I hope that's helpful. I hope it might have stimulated a bit of thought and conversation, and very happy to take some questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So much to think about. And yes, please put some questions in the chat. When you talk about role modelling and identity development, I know that our students have been watching us very carefully throughout the pandemic. And one of the ways that they've been able to reflect on that is through their humanities project. So before we take some questions for you, I think we have Lara and here somewhere. I'm kind of looking for you. Please come on the screen, unmute yourself, and
hello.
Start showing. Hooray, you're here. That was a moment of, oh, you're here. So Lara and Mata are some of the second year humanities projects prize winners, and I loved their project. I thought their project was amazing, and that you really have done a lot of what Sarah's been describing. So I'm going to hand over straight away to you, and then we'll take some questions for everybody at the end.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, is everybody able to see that? Okay, great. Thanks. So our project was called The Hidden Heroes of COVID-19, and we'll talk a bit about what that looked like and how we were inspired to do this project. So we had two main sources of inspiration for our project. The first was the staff that we interacted with, and this was in practice time and also at a pop-up day that we did in the Grenfell community. And then we were also inspired by the Grenfell community themselves, conversations with them, speaking with them and hearing about their stories through the GPs and directly from them. So amongst the staff, we saw a great diversity in roles. This ranged from the gardener that we met at the North Kensington Resource Centre where we did the pop-up vaccine day at. This was with GPs and this was with community champions as well. And we felt as though their efforts throughout the pandemic were heroic. The sacrifices many staff had made and the effort that staff had put in, the extra mile that staff had gone to support the community and like the whole NHS and country. And then with the Grenfell community, obviously they went through that disaster, you know, quite recently. and we were really affected by this and their stories. We understood that there were many hard to reach individuals within this community who had a lack of trust in the government following the Grenfell disaster and in general. And as a result of this, there was a low vaccine uptake historically with the flu in the past. And so we wanted to address or help to address this by running the pop-up day and the photography that we did on the day as well. You'll see the project, but just to give you an overview, we found that the photography of photographing the staff who we focused on allowed us to demonstrate how throughout the pandemic, staff and patients have many shared experiences, and we hope overall to improve the trust in healthcare services. So these are just a few images that we took on the day. Obviously the area that we vaccinated on, the staff that were there, GPs, gardener, photographer that was there, community champions. In the picture with the tree trunk, you can see the Grenfell building just behind it, and then just a picture of the building itself. Okay, so our final product was an A2 poster that we displayed in the GP practice, which was Exmoor Surgery, where we were based. And Mata will talk in more detail about how we took the photos and how we edited them as well. But you can see a wide range of different staff members in there, and they've all got a message written on their masks, which was a response to a question that we asked them in a questionnaire. So, for example, what are you most looking forward to after the pandemic? And then we also designed, well, a really talented member of our team designed a pack of cards, which were 7 stacks of cards with a QR link on our poster, which directs you to the pack of cards, each with a talking point. So you can download that and scan it, and you can get here. And so it's a talking point, a starting talking point for conversation. And we'll talk about, we hope for this to be used more widely in the future, which Mata will talk about in more detail. So I think Mata's here as well, just to talk about the images and how we put them together.
Hello everyone, I'm Mata. So our initial idea obviously was hidden heroes. So all of the people working throughout the pandemic that are involved in healthcare. So the initial idea was that we wanted to show that they are like superheroes to us. As you can see, the idea behind our pictures was we had each member write something on their mask that they were either looking forward to, or they were so one of the questions on our actual questionnaire was what is something that you look forward to after the pandemic? And as you can see, a lot of people, were writing things like their future, back to normality, seeing their family and friends. And that's what we wrote on the mask. We had another one of our talented colleagues who edited them to make them more brighter and visible. And around them, we had the idea of the hero kind of halo with the colors of the NHS rainbow to show inclusivity in our project. And as you can see, each member has that colorful halo with the rainbow colors around them. And with our poster, once we had put it all together, we also added the QR code at the bottom where you can just scan with your phone and it will take you to the pack of cards that we have. Change to the next slide. Yeah, so with our pack of cards, the idea was that basically after the pandemic, everyone's kind of been alone. No one's really been able to meet up and discuss everything that they've gone through during the pandemic. So we had this idea where we could have this pack of cards, and sorry, I apologize, that's my dog in the background. They had a pack of cards where it's kind of like an icebreaker between everyone, where they can go through the questions and kind of speak about the things that they were struggling in the pandemic. So if you change to the next slide. Yeah, so how it started is that the questions were going to be more simple to begin with, something like, what's your favorite song from 2020? What's the thing that made you laugh recently? What's the hobbies you picked up in the pandemic? And then as the cards go along, they get a bit more deeper so that people can, you know, get discussing things that affected them. For example, in the pandemic, I don't know if you know, for example, first year medical students, they didn't have any outside contact time. For first year medical students, they don't do placements, so they're not meeting any of their classmates or teachers outside of you know, their homes, basically, because they were just doing lectures online. So we thought this idea next year for them, when they're in second year, they these cards can be used in the classroom just to get them talking, because the pandemic was a really lonely time for them, just to get them chatting with their classmates and teachers again. And, you know, as you know, mental health is so important. Just having someone to talk to about these things and getting it off your chest can be a really big deal for people. And these cards we thought would allow us to do things like that, whether it's in classrooms or even training events. And our idea, again, we linked it to our posters. We used the inclusivity colors of the NHS rainbow. And all they have to do is scan the QR code and they will be sent to the cards, and which they can print or even just use on their phone. And at the end of the cards, we kind of thank the NHS for all of the sacrifices that they made for us to keep us all healthy and going during the pandemic. Yeah, so that's our final poster. So just a few reflections on our project. Just that this poster for us was created so that we can talk about the kind of shared experiences that we all have, especially in life-altering events such as a pandemic. And we also wanted to show that although the masks may conceal our faces, there's other ways we can communicate together. And sometimes even our eyes will communicate a lot to our colleagues and friends. You know, I don't know if everyone else does this, but I've picked up a habit where by squinting my eyes, I feel like that's a way of smiling at people. And I feel like people appreciate that, because they see that you're not just passing by with no emotion. And also, we just wanted to reiterate that, you know, we're really thankful to the staff that have worked in healthcare and the NHS in general during the pandemic. We think that their actions are heroic, and it's not just healthcare staff, but it's also other people. For example, we had the gardeners who did up the walls in the pop-up center. We have our cleaners who do so much for us, and all together collectively, they were really heroic in this pandemic. And just to summarize for our cards, we would like these cards to be used in practice. We would like them to be used as icebreakers in universities, schools, and training events. Just a way to make it easier to talk about mental health and those hard discussions that we haven't been able to make during the pandemic and while we were alone. So yeah, thank you. If Laura has anything else.
Thank you, Martha. I hope you can read the chat. There's lots of lovely feedback for you in the keep a copy of the chat. I wonder if you've patented your cards, because there's lots of people saying that they want to use them as well.
I think it's free for everyone to use if they think that it might help them. We're more than happy for everyone to use it.
It's a brilliant idea. I love your pictorial representation of resilience almost. I think that was very impactful. So I think we just have time for a couple of questions. And I wanted to take a couple from the chat because I want to give you time as well to get a coffee before your workshops. So we had one question to Radha, which I think kind of can sum up lots of things. It was, how do we have time for well-being? How do we make time?
Yeah, such a good question.
Yes.
And definitely one I can relate to. So I think a couple of ideas here, and I have not got all the answers. Please don't get me wrong, I really haven't, but I'm learning just like everyone else. So a couple of ideas is to really think about why you not only want to make time, but need to make time for well-being. So it's not actually something that we are able, if you like, to sacrifice for very long, because it will catch up with us. So really think about why you need to make time for it, why it's so important, and how it's really going to impact everything you do. And I think recognizing that even just a short period of time to do something for your well-being actually pays dividends, if you like. It really is a massive investment, because it pays dividends in terms of how efficiently you're able to work, how well you're able to cope with challenge and change. So it really is worth that sort of little bit, if you like, to get a good return on how it can help you. I think also another really powerful tool for that is the ability to say no. And I think often a lot of us just say yes automatically to everything that we're asked to do without really thinking about, can I do this? How will it impact my week? How much energy will it take? So I think about just pausing for sort of 5 or 10 seconds before you say yes to something, and the power of saying no if you feel you're not able to is really helpful. And I think also recognizing that scheduling in time. So I know it sounds really boring and really non-creative, but scheduling in time in your diary for creativity and for joy. And even if it is just 10 minutes, 15 minutes, that's better than nothing. And so I really think it's about thinking about your priorities, looking at your schedule in practical terms, and thinking about the sort of maybe the 3 simple things that you're going to do in your week, for example, that's to do with your well-being, and making sure you don't sacrifice those for anybody or anything.
Absolutely, thank you. Inspiring us to prioritise it. And then just one quick question, Sarah, I noticed you've answered a lot of your questions in the chat, thank you. I thought it was interesting, what are the students' perceptions of blended learning going forward? The press is all about students demanding their tuition fees back. How can we make this work?
Yeah, no, you're quite right. And I think the early years of the medical school have been affected far more by that than the later years. The later years have had the privilege of being in the clinical environment. And so they've had that variety already. So the early years are definitely fighting back. And if they can go to a nightclub, why can't they go to a lecture theatre and be with everybody? And so we are having to explain to them what the advantages are of online learning and the flexibility that it provides. And I think a lot of students have actually appreciated that, but they don't want 7 hours of back-to-back lectures. That is absolutely what we've learned this year, is that does not work, and having the variety to their learning is much better. I think in the later years, online learning doesn't replace face-to-face and clinical interaction at all. But it can be an adjunct, and it can be there. And as I put in the chat, it's useful on those days off or the days in between clinics, or when we're trying to reduce footfall in practices, to have a day where they are doing that consolidation, and that we're giving them some guided online learning to do.
Welcome back, everybody. I had a really enjoyable workshop, and I hope you all did too. I'm Rini Paul. I know the majority of you, but for those of you that may be new to KUMEC or not joined us before, I'm Rini Paul. I'm one of the other teacher development leads and a GP in North London. And I am delighted to welcome today and introduce Dr. Lois Haruna Cooper, who is a fellow GP. She is a UCL alumni and is back at UCL as the EDI lead, so the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion lead at UCL. Lois has been interested in widening participation and in equity in education for a long time, and she found that having conversations with her students, she was sort of frustrated by the lack of progress, and that's led her to some of the work that she's doing. So we invited Lois today to really share with us a slightly different perspective and to hear what UCL are doing. So I will hand over to you, Lois.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Just going to try and share my presentation. So hopefully you can all see this clearly. So I'll be talking a little bit about race equality in the curriculum at UCL Medical School. As Winnie kindly introduced, I've been there, I was there previously as a medical student, so I was back there in 2005 to 2011. And I've been involved in volunteering for many years. So since I left, I've been involved with Target Medicine, which is their widening participation unit for the medical school. And I've since been back as part of the education consultancy part of the medical school. So I've been at UCL for a long time, so it's given me a really unique perspective and seeing it from different angles, both as a student and staff, and that's helped with some of the work that I've been doing. Oops. So what I hope that you understand by the end of my talk today is just have a bit of an understanding of the timeline of the curriculum changes that we've done at the medical school from a viewpoint of racial equality. I'm going to give you an overview of some of the individual sessions, just so you can see some of the work we've done and how we're trying to impart this knowledge onto our students. I'm going to give you some examples of good practice from some of our colleagues that are outside of the EDI committee, but who are still also embedding kind of racial equality into their teaching and the work they do. And also, what are our plans looking forward? So before we start, I think it's quite important for me to provide some context into our work around race equality and curriculum development. UCL has also always been a university of inclusion and about challenging status quo. And the medical school is really no exception to this. It's got a Decolonising the Medical Curriculum team, which has been addressing inequalities in the curriculum for many, many years. However, in 2020, following the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement that followed, we felt there was a real shift amongst our students. And we started hearing more and more experiences of racism within the medical school and their clinical placements. And for me, especially when some of the experiences were so similar to things that I had been through, I felt really frustrated that nothing had really changed, and it sounded like there was a lot of pledges and a lot of things were happening within the university and within the medical school, but the students didn't seem to be feeling the impact of that. And that was something that really galvanized me to say, okay, well, what can I do? So over the course of kind of spring and summer last year, there was a real effort to create a culture and create an environment where students felt comfortable to be able to share their experiences and to be able to speak about what they had experienced. And not just talking about it, but actually translate what had happened to them into real changes and making sure that the information was gathered and put together. And so what we did is we formulated an action plan, and this was across the EDI committee, so not just from race and ethnicity issues, but also LGBTQ issues, faith, parenting and caring, and mental well-being. And we had 4 main sections in our action plan: policy and practice, student experience, staff and training, and the curriculum. And that's the area that I'll be focusing on today. But it was really important for you to understand that actually the curriculum is just one part of the puzzle, and it won't really work if we are making curriculum changes in isolation, because this needs to be mirrored throughout the medical school. So over the past year, we created a lot of new sessions for the curriculum across all years, but it felt quite reactionary. So it felt like we were made aware of a problem when we identified an issue, and then we could try to kind of plug that gap or plug an absence in the knowledge that we noticed with a session. And although the sessions have been very well reviewed, I'll talk later about how over the course of the next few years, we wanted to change our direction slightly with that. So there's some of the sessions that we introduced are listed here, and what I will do is I'll go through some of these specifically over the next few slides, just talking about what the content of them were and what the purposes of them were. When we did introduce these sessions, we realised that it's very difficult just sometimes to talk solely about race and race equality without considering some of the other intersections that will be impacting our students. And so these are the sessions that I've pulled that kind of specifically that have a race focus, but there were many other sessions that we included that were much more intersectional. And if you look at the content of these sessions, actually a lot of the aims and the objectives cut across lots of different values and lots of EDI subgroups. So we started off with the year for our first year medical students with a bite-sized talk on the medical school and race equality and what we were doing. And for us, it was really important that when students came into the medical school, they had a good understanding of what was happening and what we were doing, and also who the UCL committee was in case they had any issues or any suggestions or they wanted to get involved. And this was quite difficult because we were aware that there was so much going on with Black Lives Matter and students just being very vocal in the community about what was affecting them. And so we wanted to make sure that students knew that we were aware of this and we were embracing it and we were trying to make changes, but also we didn't want them to feel worried at all that, you know, they're going to have an unpleasant experience throughout medical school. And so it was trying to strike that balance of here we are, this is what we're doing, and also just remembering that reminding them that they're ambassadors of UCLs and what our expectations of them are in terms of their behaviour and the way they conduct themselves. So this next session, Cultural Competency and Safety, was actually designed and delivered by medical students in their latter years, in their 5th and 6th year. Sarah, one of the students, did a BSc in anthropology and is one of the core members of the Decolonising the Medical Curriculum team. And this session really set out to explore this GMT guidance around the importance of cultural factors in patient care, the complexity of culture, and how to learn to avoid stereotyping, essentialising and exoticising other people, the meaning and the difference between cultural competency and cultural safety, and the model of cultural safety that can be applied to social interactions and also within institutional cultures. We wanted students to understand their positionality and who they are, including their particular backgrounds, their upbringing, their identities, beliefs and worldviews, and how this may shape their unconscious bias. And also the importance of reflexivity and understanding who they are in their relation to the environment around them, and develop a self-awareness and empathy towards others. So these were the 2 main sessions that we delivered in year 1. There were also some other sessions delivered by some of our students, looking at a student who had recently graduated, did a session called the Sepsis 6 of racism. And that was just his take on his approach and what they can do individually within their clinical environment and within their university environment to try and prevent themselves perpetuating some of the issues that are going on, and be anti-racist, be active bystanders and be good allies to their colleagues and patients. In year 2, we delivered a session called Justice, Equality and Health. And this is one of the sessions that was delivered in the students' vertical module, so clinical and professional practice. So it was delivered by the tutors. So we actually had a session with the tutors beforehand to go through the presentation with them and the session, to answer any questions that the tutors had, and also give the tutors a bit of a training before they then had to deliver the session. And with any of these kind of topics, we feel that sometimes, although it's not always possible to deliver it in small group settings, they're really perfect for stimulating conversation and delving a little bit deeper. And so where possible, we do try and make a use of our small group teaching sessions and CPP sessions, ethics and law sessions, to try and really allow students to have these conversations and be a lot more active and participate in them, rather than just kind of taking in information. So this session was really to improve the students' understanding of how racism can impact health and healthcare and the medical school, and the role that they should play themselves in tackling this. We wanted them to understand how racism and racial microaggressions can contribute to adverse health outcomes. We wanted them to be able to describe the impact of discrimination on their learning environments and reflect on their own positions of privilege and how this might affect them as a learner and also as a care provider, and explore the ways that they could affect change as a medical student to improve patient outcomes. And also describe how they can start thinking about their learning and how they interact with the materials they're provided with, so that they can put themselves in a better position to treat a more diverse population. So at UCL, students intercalate in their 3rd year. So we didn't design any sessions for the students because they would obviously be in different departments. But moving back onto the 4th year, we felt that one of the key things that we really wanted students to understand is that when we talk about health inequalities and we talk about racism within medicine, there's often this misconception that it's being perpetuated by people who, you know, people have a stereotypical view of what a racist is, then they're a big bad person, and, you know, they go out with evil intentions. And it was really kind of breaking that down and helping students understand that actually the majority of the health inequalities we see are committed by good doctors who are doing their best and who are unaware of sometimes the unconscious biases they have and how the trickle-down effects of these can cause these health inequalities. And so it's getting students to really be reflective and be insightful and be intentional in the interactions they have with patients, and being mindful of the information that they receive, the information they might not receive because of barriers that might be there that not necessarily their fault, that patients perceive, and what they can do to try and overcome these. And so this session was really to get students just to critically reflect and commit to being an inclusive doctor. And obviously a large part of our interactions with patients is taking histories and communicating with them. And so thinking about just the general history taking performer, and what questions are we asking? How do we ask these questions? What information we receive, and making sure we're really thoughtful about each of these interactions. And also if there are things about us, or if there are things that patients might assume about us, what can we do as clinicians, or what can we do as doctors, as medical students, to try and break down these barriers and make patients trust us and be willing to share information where there might be some hesitancy or fear. In year 4, we also had a session on responding to discrimination and raising concerns. And this was really to improve students' understanding about how and when to raise concerns and how they can be an active bystander. And this session kind of incorporated an existing session about raising concerns that was already in existence, but we had a lot of feedback from students that they didn't really feel that it taught them or facilitated them having a better understanding of how to raise kind of racial related concerns. And this is just a really good example of when I talk about it's not possible to do these teaching sessions in isolation. We realised that actually just teaching them about raising concerns and what they should do in the right pathways wasn't enough, because on the other side there was a lot of difficulties students had interacting with the our official Raising Concerns platform. And we then had to look at that and say, well, actually, what is the problem here? How can we improve the student interaction, improve student engagement, make the process more transparent so that they're aware of what's going on, improve feedback back to students when they do raise a concern, and make it clear to them the types of concerns that they should be reporting, and making them feel comfortable that if they're worried about something, yes, they can use this, and the process should be clear to them. So that's just a run through of a few of the sessions that we have included. Other examples of good practice that are happening across the medical school are our anatomy and dissection department have improved their image stock and provided more diverse resources. There was student feedback about concerns that the cadavers that they had access to, and also some of the interactive material, didn't really represent a wide range of patients, and they felt that actually they're learning anatomy in a very specific way and they might not recognise variations in different body types and different skin tones. And so they reacted very, very positively to student feedback, and it's an ongoing work for them, but they've already put some changes in place. Similarly, our dermatology department are going through a massive workload to go through all their teaching materials and update their images with pictures of patients with black and brown skin and not just white skin, so students are used to recognising common and rare conditions and serious conditions in a wide range of skin tones. The clinical and professional practice lead has been very proactive in trying to think about how they can include racial equality training for all the tutors. So these are tutors that run small group work on a weekly basis with our students as part of their vertical modules, and how we can equip them to be better tutors from this point of view. Similarly, we know that students' learning is very much driven by assessment, as Sarah kindly highlighted earlier in her presentation. And part of our work is that we know that some students won't necessarily see this as an issue for them or important for them. And so it's really important for us that any changes we make to the curriculum, any new learning objectives that we put in, is reflected in assessments as well. So students are aware that this is something that they need to know, and it's part of the fundamentals for them to be a good doctor. And so the assessment team that's one part of the work that they've been doing, is making sure that we can reflect some of these changes throughout the assessments, both formative and summative. As a committee and as the EDI lead, I've been invited to, I think, all the teaching committees now, the executive committees, and we've got faculty representation. And I think it's just really important that this isn't work that can happen in isolation. It's not something that can be done by just one person. And it's really important that actually everyone within the medical school plays their role in whatever job they have. It doesn't necessarily have to be student facing. There are things that happen throughout, and as I mentioned before, policy and practice is part of the a large part of what we're doing, and professional services have been very instrumental in helping us move some of these points forward. But it's really important that we, one, present our message in a way that helps people understand how they can engage with it, makes them want to be involved. And we think it's, you know, it's really important because it does affect us all. It affects all the students and it affects all the patients, either directly or indirectly. So where do we go from here? As I mentioned earlier, the work we've been doing over the past year and a half has felt quite reactionary. We were very overwhelmed with the amount of student feedback and the student experiences that were mentioned to us last year, and we very much wanted to not lose momentum and show students that we were taking on board, you know, the comments that they made to us. And so a lot of the sessions and the material that we've been designing so far has been in reaction to that. What we want to do going forward is be a lot more proactive in our review of the curriculum and implementation of changes. And we know for this to happen, it's not going to be a case of just adding on session, that EDI is something that has to be embedded throughout all of our teaching materials, from physiology to pharmacology to kind of more practical teaching sessions. We need to have a deeper look at our educational constructs and our Eurocentric approach to medical education and think, is this universally applicable? And I think one of the key things about what we've been doing at UCL Medical School is just the way that we've been working so closely with our students. And we've actually got a Changemaker project that's been happening for the best part of 6 months now. And this is a collaboration between the EDI committee and the Decolonising the Medical Curriculum team. And they're looking to review the curriculum, and they've been reviewing the curriculum from EDI point of view to incorporate decolonial, which includes anti-racist, LGBTQ plus inclusive and intersectional perspectives into the existing EDI curriculum for all years. They'll be reviewing the current sessions that we have, some of which I've gone through today, and also developing a structure for the EDI curriculum. This goes alongside a much larger body of work that they've been doing, looking at just reforming the curriculum in general and thinking about, you know, where does the research that we use for teaching about pharmacology and evidence-based medicine come from? Is it really representative of our population? When we think of good practice, when we think of quality, where do those ideas and markers of quality come from? A lot of, as I mentioned before, a lot of these things are kind of Eurocentric approach, and we know that actually we're working in a global university and we're treating a global population, and do these models suffice? Are they sufficient? I think central to everything is just that we continue collaborating with our students, and I know at King's you've done a lot of work with your students. I know Ola Yinka and Alexandra, I believe, have done a lot of work with the Afro-Caribbean Medical Society and the medical school in terms of bringing similar issues to light and working forward to see how they can be addressed. So I think the take-home messages is, one, this change is well overdue. Although we're doing a lot of work now, we realise that we're not, a lot of the things that are coming to light are not new. They've been reported for 10, 20, 30, 40 years plus. Talking to students is very important. I think there's a wealth of information and literature exploring racism in medical education and how to approach addressing this. And I think this is really important because as much as we work with students, I'm always very mindful of how taxing it can be and how burdensome it can be, especially when you're reliving trauma and difficult episodes. And so I think it's our responsibility to say, well, have we saturated ourselves with all the other information that's out there? So when students coming to us, we're not having to ask them to explain things that we could have easily read elsewhere. We're not asking them to tell us things that we could have gained from elsewhere. They can share their experiences and they can share things that we can't necessarily learn elsewhere. And that's just really just to remove that kind of emotional toll on them. At the same time, it's great that they're doing so much, but they're still here to get their medical degree, and that in itself is an awful lot of work. And so I always have at the back of my mind, are the students doing too much? Is this something they can cope with? And it's great that they want to be so involved, but I think we also have a duty to protect them and safeguard them as well. And I think also just amongst ourselves, we just need to consider the idea of this minority tax. And if this isn't a kind of a concept or phrase that you're familiar with, it's essentially the idea that when we talk about racial equality work and when we talk about LGBTQ rights, we often find that the people lobbying for these things are the people that are affected by them the most. And so this is an extra strain, not just emotionally, but it can be in terms of career progression, it can be in terms of opportunities, because their time is so consumed by doing this work that they miss out on the scope of a lot of other things. And so it's just considering how we utilise the staff that are doing this work, what demands and what requests we put on them, and make sure that we're considering this when we do it. So thank you very much. And that's my kind of overview of what we've been doing at UCL Medical School, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Lois. We're going to hold on for questions until the student presentations. I hope that's okay, and that you can stay with us. And our student presenters last year for our conference were Olayinka and Alexandra. So it was really nice. We wanted to invite you particularly to hear what UCL are doing and see what we can learn from each other. And I think you've set this up beautifully for our next two presenters. I was going to say they're student presenters, but actually they're not. They're recently qualified doctors, Natasha Chilambo and Nivathitha Ganapatharam. And Nivathitha, apologies if I've mispronounced your name. I met these two a while ago, but had heard about the work they were doing. They've set up something called Structure in the Clinic, and they're piloting structural competency teaching at KCL. Last week, they organised the Med School's Faculty Development Conference, did an amazing job. So I'm going to hand over to them to share a bit about the work they've done, which includes sort of decolonising the curriculum, but they can tell you much better than me what they've been up to. So Natasha and Nivi, are you there?
So yeah, I'm Nivathitha, and I'm here with my friend and colleague Natasha, and today we'd like to speak on this aspiration that we have, which is unlocking radical imagination. This is something that we believe will bring us closer to fairer futures, both in medical education and beyond. So we often hear a lot of buzzwords and sound bites around how we go about making things fairer. Equality, diversity, inclusion, decolonize, cultural competency, social determinants, attainment gap, anti-racist curriculums, structural competency, all of these different words. And often, while all of these ideas and streams of work are very valuable and very important in their own way, they can make the issue at hand feel very complex and very overwhelming. As the previous speaker was saying, it can be exhausting and for medical students and as well as doctors, and frustrating to grapple with them. And I think Natasha and I have certainly felt this way, and quite often too.
So in the next 5 minutes or so, we would like to take you on a journey with us and share with you what radically reimagined medical education means to us. And of course, this is a peek through the keyhole of a vastly expansive and dynamic space. But at the heart of all of this for us are two core ideas. Firstly, there is no medicine without social medicine. We've included this illustration we created to visually conceptualize the pathogenesis of asthma in a way that looks at the physical, that is bronchial constriction in the lungs, to the social, that is the poor standard of housing and air pollution, to the institutional, that is the structural racism and hostile immigration policies that lead to poor access to and provision of care. Purely biomedical understandings of disease are overstated and overvalued in the medical curriculum, leaving less time, resource, and conceptual space for alternative perspectives and interdisciplinary discourse.
Secondly, we must demand that our institutions decolonize and not simply diversify. Diversifying into fundamentally unjust and unequal institutional structures does not and cannot eradicate injustice and injustice and inequality. what we need to do is we need to ask questions about power. Who has the power to set the agenda? Who has the power to set the curriculum, both now and historically? Who doesn't? And how do we go about redistributing this power? How do we centre the marginalised voices? These are the questions we need to be asking. And we couldn't say it better than the poet Suhaima Manzoor Khan, who at our recent faculty day read this poem, Decentering Diversity. Equal access to unjust systems is not liberation. More people of colour on pedagogically unchanged reading lists is not salvation.
So now we ask, what does this look like in practice? And mine and Navitha's path met quite serendipitously whilst doing our dissertations, where we spent countless hours in thinking, rethinking and dreaming together about what the alternative futures of medical education might look like. And Structure in the Clinic is what we bore. It's an initiative that aims to promote and contribute to the critical discussions around structural forces that shape our health. And we are committed to doing this in an epistemically just way. So for us, it means that our work will strive to be intersectional, multidisciplinary, and transcultural.
We have run several of these group things, which are a journal club of sorts, which we invite you all to join if you can in the future, where we aspire to create a discursive space where we come together and collectively think about and imagine new ways of knowing. It's a space to discuss and reflect rather than simply prescribe and consume. And in the age of limitless social media, endless streams of articles, tweets, and infographics, we hope to work to create a space for a slowness of thought, where we can really simmer in these ideas and co-produce fresh perspectives and alternative framings. We aim to draw on a diverse range of sources, maybe ones that have historically not been included in the curriculum, championing forms of knowledge that are often left out, such as music, art, film, podcasts, and literature, a whole host of other things. And in the first groupthink, we listened to Breaking Binaries, which is a podcast, and we listened to an episode that unpacked the language of majority, minority, and how these racial categorizations are a function of power. And here on the slide are some of our reflections that came out of that group discussion. And as you can see, it was a very rich and textured discussion that took us to the art that you see here by Asma Iswani and the music of Deptford-based jazz collective Steam Down. And all of this came together to hopefully inform our future clinical practice.
And in the recent faculty day that we organised, there was a conference last week. It was our hope that these dreams that we dream of for medical education came about through a range of speakers and workshops, so championing like the plurality of coming to know. And we hope to translate these ideas from the margins into the language of the mainstream academy. So we might start working towards operationalizing them institutionally. We hope to plant a seed, and I think together we did. And there was an appetite and a curiosity for these alternative framings of health. And there was also quite a lot of discomfort in the room, but we were incredibly grateful for this. For us, discomfort and tension are prerequisites for growth. So we end here on this painting called Free the Storm by Dora Lamb. And this is where Navitha and I started, and this is a painting that we keep coming back to. It was of the jazz collective Steam Down, painted live as they performed and improvised at one of their gigs, which I had the privilege and just amazingness of being present at. And jazz compels us to participate. It makes space for the different musicians and different listeners. It's dynamic and chaotic, yet as it all comes together, there's a fullness of knowledge.
And I guess this is what Natasha and I and a lot of other people too want for medical education and for eventually clinical practice. We want to prime medical students and doctors to be more curious, for our curriculums to encourage us to approach alternative forms of knowledge, especially the knowledge of the people that we treat, with curiosity and, importantly, with humility, rather than mistrust and dismissiveness. Such a perspective can unshackle pedagogy and move away from the idea that knowledge production and learning are things that happen within the rigid boundaries of the textbook, of the journal, of the lecture hall, or on the ward, where even listening to jazz, not even to be honest, where listening to jazz and dancing in the middle of a sweaty crowd in Deptford can be an opportunity to learn and to inform the way that we practice caregiving. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you both so much. I've written in massive letters by my side in oil pastel. There is no medicine without social medicine. It's so powerful, isn't it? And we welcome the storm, definitely. So I want to hand over to Charlotte, because she, if anyone knows this, it's Charlotte. There's no medicine without social medicine. She's again a newly qualified doctor who's done the most amazing placement. I'm not going to say any more. I think, can we just hear about it, Charlotte, so we can all learn from you?
Yeah, of course. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
we can see you, we can hear you.
Elaborate microphone going on here. So yeah, I was very privileged to learn exactly what social in medicine really means and what we don't get taught whilst we're at medical school, despite being the final placement of my 5 years. And I was really privileged to have a placement at Great Chapel Street Medical Centre, which, if you haven't heard of it, is in Westminster, and it's a specialist GP for people who are experiencing homelessness. And I was there with Dr. Dana Bill as my supervisor and Dr. Natalie Miller as well, who made this the best placement of my time. And despite my elective not being what I expected planned due to COVID, I had a time that I will never regret, and it was a seminal experience for me in my career. So I was asked to speak about what made it such a great placement, and I sat down to think about what really made it so great, and actually really struggled because it all seems like common sense as to what happened when I was there. But I think the things that we think are commonplace are actually harder to come by than you expect. And I've certainly experienced that in some of my other placements previously. So firstly, one of the things that I think Dana did so excellently was she was in contact with me constantly before I started my placement, and then she had a half-an-hour meeting with me before I joined. I've had these before, but Dana really took the time to actually know who I was. She centered me in the discussion. She wanted to know what I was about, what my passions were, and what I wanted to do. It wasn't about what sign-offs was I going to get, what skills did I need to get in history taking or examination, and it wasn't about me just being there to provide a clinic. And it was so excellent that we had a bond before I even stepped into her GP practice. And then secondly, I got to do such a great variety of activities. So in that meeting, Dana had asked me what I wanted to do, and she went above and beyond in emailing everybody she knew to whether they could spend some time with me. And that wasn't just people within the healthcare scene, it was loads of charity organisations, outreach workers, hostel workers, and policymakers as well. So when I turned up, there were so many things that I could do and choose from that she'd already organised for me. And I think that's a really important thing that we can apply to other placements. So in GP, I think we often find that we'll go into a room and be sat there doing our own clinic in final year, and that's fantastic. But sometimes it can feel like you're sat in a room from 9 to 5 and you don't see anyone and you have very little discussion. And what we really need to remember is that GP isn't just the clinic. GP is rooted in the community, and just like everyone has just said, the medicine is social. We need to understand who's around us in order to have the best practices we can, and it's really where GP excels, is in its community work and understanding who it's there for. And as students, I think it's often neglected to remind us that we're here to serve a patient group. Where do they come from? What shapes this background? What the structural determinants that have meant that they have these conditions, or what's going on. And then as doctors, we often don't have the time to engage in all these social problems, going out and seeing community groups, etc. But for me, I went to hostels, I did the street outreach. I was able to really root my understanding in who I was seeing every day, what their living circumstances were actually like, how they'd ended up there. I could have very casual discussions on the street or in a hostel, rather than just about their health and their illness, like I do in a 10-minute consultation when I was on my other GP placement. And this is applicable everywhere, because we really need to understand the political, the structural, and the social determinants of health. And we need to see where these solutions can be found. It's so easy to have a consultation that feels like it hasn't gone anywhere and you really want to help and do more. And I remember that so well from my other GP placement. But if we go out into the communities, we see where they are, we can start to see where the solutions can come from. And as students, it's a really great place for us to be thinking of new ideas. There's also so many services involved in GP. It's not just the practice. There are so many community groups. There are so many social people and different things going on. So it's really important, I think, that placements involve that as well. And then lastly, this may seem like a bit of an boring and ordinary thing, but actually knowing what project management and the day-to-day running of a GP is something that I'd never seen before. And whilst it can be a lot of numbers and a lot of business meetings, etc., I actually really enjoyed it, and it really shaped the reality of GP for me. And I'm sure other students may find health policy interesting too. And I know in our final year of King's, in our GP placement, we have to do our quality improvement project, and it often feels like a bit of a tick box exercise that we have to complete, and we're just doing it because we have to do it. But what Dana did was she really gave me agency and trusted me in whatever I wanted to do when I was there. She told me a problem and she gave me the afternoon to go home and figure out exactly what it was that I could do. And whilst I was still trying to meet the quality indicators you have to meet, I could also see where there were bigger solutions and greater solutions that, quite frankly, they didn't have the time to do, but that's what I was there for my elective. And it was so great to get me so involved. And she really gave me trust in whatever I did, which made, I felt really valued. Which brings me on to the last thing, why this has kind of been an ode to Dana, is that she really made sure that we had a relationship between the two of us. She was really trusting. She was so honest with me about what it was really like life as a GP before she went into specialist services and while she was there. Even the bad parts, the good parts, she told me everything, and meant that I felt like I wasn't just a student and her my mentor. I felt like we were on equal pegging the whole way through. And all my work, I felt really valued. She always said thank you. She always told me what was good, what was bad, and she wouldn't hesitate what she said to me most of the time. And it also meant that I was a real big part of the team. So we'd all sit and have chats every morning. I knew them all really well. I still get to talk to them now, which is something that you often don't get as a medical student. And it meant that I could really see where I could make change and make sure that I can keep doing it now, even whilst I'm not in London and not near the practice anymore. So yeah, ultimately, I think the relationship is key, and it can be really difficult to build those relationships, but the more work that goes in, the better the placement will be, both for your student and for you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Something that I know you all do as tutors, and it just shows what a difference it makes. And I know Charlotte's being very modest here, but she's received a commendation from the Dean because she really was a key part of the vaccination programme in this group of patients who are sleeping in hostels or street homeless. You know, it was a big deal. And tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in lockdown. Tash has just finished her IBSc in primary care, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to speak. I've been doing a few bits, but I'm going to spend some time, well, 5 minutes talking about Future Frontline. So I had many mad ideas over lockdown, including 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles. But I suppose one of the more productive and useful ideas was I set up an organisation called Future Frontline. So Future Frontline purpose is to inspire and support the next generation of NHS healthcare workers. So we believe that collaborative practice that during my time in medical school, I feel like I've only been exposed to medical students, haven't really had the opportunity to learn about all of the other roles that are so important and valuable in the multidisciplinary team. I know that at all of our medical school interviews, everybody must mention the multidisciplinary team, but I don't think many people actually truly understand what that means and understand the multitude of roles within the NHS. I was so shocked to hear that there were 350 different careers. So we try and educate young people about all of these different roles, such as speech and language therapists, paediatric nurses, occupational health therapists, to give them, to help them find the career that is most suited to them. I think over the pandemic, lots of young people felt inspired to embark on a career in healthcare, but actually maybe being a doctor or being a dentist or being a nurse wasn't for them. So we're trying to give them the knowledge to choose a career that they would be they would find most fulfilling. I guess as well, at the heart of everything we do, we believe socioeconomic status should never be a barrier to pursuing healthcare. As you know, the other speakers have mentioned, having a diverse workforce is only going to benefit the NHS. So everything we do is free of charge for students. We've been running a series of webinars to try and provide students with some form of work experience. So we've had about 10 webinars, I think, so far, from speech and language therapy, from dietetics, to mental health nursing, to radiology, radiography, where we have professionals and students alike from those professions giving talks about their day-to-day job, the skills needed for that job, just trying to provide some form of work experience, which obviously has been so hard to find, well, for students during the pandemic. So we have a website, we're present on all of social media. We've got some really exciting things coming up, including trying to help mature students as well get into healthcare. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, then feel free, but that's what we've been doing. Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of the conference, and I hope that you'll all go away with something to reflect on and work with. Compassion, kindness, living with joy, blended learning, decolonizing our curriculum, and this is really important to us. We're very committed in KUMEC to decolonizing our curriculum. Enhancing interactivity, finding your inner expert, drawing our feelings, standing up against microaggressions, and working with challenging students. So there's so much that's come out from this morning. And looking forward, we do continue to face an uncertain future. However, over the last year, we have rapidly developed many new ways and structures for working educationally and clinically, and they support blended and flexible approaches of remote and face-to-face working. Whatever happens, our GP curriculum, the Year 2 longitudinal GP placement, the Year 3 simulated surgeries, the Year 4 quality improvement projects, Year 5 8-week placements, and the intercalated BSc in primary care, amongst other things, will continue. And students will continue to be essential workers and will require clinical placements. How small and large group teaching will pan out does depend on social distancing rules, and we need to be ready for sudden changes. However, I do believe that we've had much of the experience now and the resource to face what might come, and we just need to be aware, flexible, and quick-footed, as do our students, and we've certainly been trained to be that. And I really look forward to the journey ahead with you into the next academic year, and just thank you again from the bottom of my heart for everything you've done for us. Just incredible. So before we move to the last part of the conference, 2 poems, one final thing that I'm sad to announce that Ros Herbert's leaving our team. She's moving on to a training in art-based child psychotherapy, which is just incredible. And she'll still work with us on certain projects. So just to thank Ros for everything you've done for us, Ros, and what an amazing person. And we're not going to lose contact with you, which is really great. And so I'm pleased to announce that Dr. Leila Abdullah will now be working with Rini Paul as Teacher Development Lead. And we welcome you, Leila, to the post, and you'll all be meeting with her in her new role in the new academic year.
Thank you.
So I'm going to leave it there. So there's Leila. Hi, Leila.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to the journey working with you all in future.
Yeah.
Welcome, Leila. Goodbye, Ross. Yeah.
I know, but I'm going to end with some poems. So we've got 2 poems to end. So we have Gabriella Mazzoni. Gabriella or Gabby, are you here? Gabby is an amazing second year who's written a poem really about her first experiences of interacting with patients. Gabby, far away.
Thank you. I don't have a title yet, so I'm happy to take suggestions. Here I go. A million questions, obs, palpation, both her hands in firm pronation, eyeing up her walking aid, prescription ready to display, divulging details past and present, all with a manner calm and pleasant. One by one we do our best to hear the ticking in her chest. Is this okay? We ask with concern. Of course, my dears, you have to learn. And so the probing carries on. Her breathing's normal, her pulse is strong. Her day of birth, why the day before? Congratulations in uproar. And through our goggles, now it seems, her big blue eyes begin to gleam.
Thank you, Gabby. That's beautiful, so poignant. And then we have Martin. Martin ended another conference with this poem, which I think we wanted to do the same because it summed up the pandemic to so many of us. So over to Martin, and then if everyone could just turn on their cameras and wave goodbye, that would be lovely.
So this is a poem about a wave. What's in a wave? What does a wave mean to you? A wave goodbye, a wave hello, a wave of sadness that just won't go. A new wave of fashion, a music trend, another wave coming, a fear for a friend. A wave that can kill, a wave that can cure, a wave of a hand that helps reassure. A wave that suppresses, a wave that destroys, a wave that empowers, a wave that employs. A wave of information causes surf on the web, a drop in the ocean that stalls to an ebb. A wave of destruction, a wave overwhelms, a wave to the nation from those at the helm. A wave that connects us, a wave of light in the room, a wave until next time we meet over Zoom. A wave to play on, a wave to say time, a wave of a sentence, a wave of a fine. A wave in the heart, a wave in the brain, a wave triggers muscle, a wave in the main. QRSTU, a waveform that yearns, a heart that beats, breaks and skips, warms, jumps and burns. A wave that can comfort and cut through the noise, relief, joy, laughter, swells, flows and deploys, a wave of new compassion, a wave of new hope. The next wave of professions bringing new ways to cope. So a wave from us and a wave to you. Goodbye for now, and we'll meet again soon.